I can clearly recall the day I turned my back on my hometown. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the cool air carried the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. I packed up everything I held dear into my trusty old pickup truck, determined to leave behind the heartache and start anew. Though the decision to leave wasn't an easy one, it was essential. My life had been shattered by betrayal and deceit, and I knew that creating distance from the people who had wronged me was the only path toward healing. After driving for hours, I stumbled upon a quaint, sleepy town that seemed like it had been waiting for someone like me. The locals were warm and welcoming. The pace of life was refreshingly slow, and the town had an undeniable charm. While exploring, I found an old, rundown gas station and garage that had been listed for sale for years. I saw potential where others saw decay and made a modest offer, which to my surprise was accepted. That property became the foundation for both my new life and my business. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting quietly in my favorite tavern, savoring the rare peace. This place had become my sanctuary since I moved here. Shortly after arriving, I purchased the gas station and repair shop at a bargain price, seeing an opportunity where others saw failure. The previous owner, eager to offload it after years without buyers, had been more than willing to sell. To truly breathe life back into the business, the first thing I did was construct a large retail store right in front of the gas station. This was a lifeline for the town after the only grocery store began closing at 7 p.m. I repositioned the fuel tanks to make the pumps visible from the store, which also created plenty of convenient parking for customers. The store thrived, particularly from 7 p.m. to midnight, and it operated 24/7. Meanwhile, the garage at the back was open during regular business hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, with occasional special projects on Saturdays. Initially, the local bar wasn't thrilled when I started selling basic liquor at the store. But over time, this decision proved to be profitable, created much-needed jobs, and added value to the community. The business flourished after I restructured the store's interior merchandising, a move inspired by a savvy woman I had hired. In no time, the equity loan was repaid, and demand skyrocketed, forcing me to double the staff. Friday and Saturday nights became peak hours for selling junk food to bar patrons, while Sundays brought in steady sales of cold beer at fair prices. David sifted through the copies of all the legal documents, noting the meticulous records my former attorney had kept. "From what I can tell," David began, "your mother was served with a divorce petition the same day you left." I nodded and replied, "That's right. Sophie needs to talk to her great-aunt Eleanor, if she's still alive. She knows more about what really happened." David agreed, his tone serious. "Sophie told me it's crucial we find you now. She says you deserve to be free of Cassandra's schemes and to finalize the divorce. But she also wants answers. What happened to the money Cassandra got? Why did she sell the house if it was hers? And why did she plan to sue you for abandonment as soon as she tracked you down? She'll need help uncovering the truth," I said. "Asked her to have her sister watch the baby a bit longer and then talk to Eleanor. Maybe her great-aunt will finally open up." David nodded again. "We'll keep this between us for now. From everything I've seen, there might be serious fraud at play. Why has your mother been slandering your father for years? And that $250,000, it vanished as soon as it reached your attorney's hands. If the DA gets involved, it's better if no one else knows yet." I rose from the table to grab us something to drink, giving David the privacy to finish his call. He glanced at me when he hung up and asked, "Why is Eleanor so important to this?" "She gathered the evidence of Cassandra and George's affair," I explained. "Eleanor was like a mother to the family, even though she never married. She raised her daughter on her own, and that gave her a unique perspective. She always suspected Vanessa and Cassandra were conspiring against George and me, but their ultimate goal was unclear." "And what would they gain from that?" David asked, curiosity sharpening his voice. "Eleanor's granddaughter Emily has been trying to get her to move in with her, but Eleanor refuses. She says she won't leave until the truth is out. Emily's been keeping her company with her 2 young sons. She's a private person and avoids most people, especially Cassandra and Vanessa, who have a history of using and manipulating everyone around them. Eleanor's documents finally made me realize how deep their betrayal ran. David leaned back in his chair. "Do you want to ask me anything about your kids before I go?" "Not until I'm sure you are who you claim to be," I replied firmly. This could all be part of their plan. Look into my former attorney's sudden death. If Cassandra is planning to sue me, why does she think she can win? David's face paled slightly, clearly realizing the type of people he'd become entangled with. Despite this, we decided to exchange contact information and work together cautiously. I walked him to the door, shook his hand, and watched him leave. Then I locked up the apartment, took a circuitous route home to ensure I wasn't followed, and gave myself time to think. At home, I was greeted by the best part of my life, my 3- and 4-year-old children. They ran to me, giggling as they grabbed my legs. I scooped them up, feeling gratitude swell in my chest. My wife, Emily, called out that dinner was almost ready, so I washed up and joined them. As we sat around the table, I shared the events of my day. Life since closing the store had been good, better than I'd ever imagined. I had a family I loved, and my past felt far away. That wasn't always the case. When I left Paradise nearly 7 years ago, I promised Eleanor I'd keep in touch, and I did. I called her every Sunday. About 1.5 years ago, she called me, asking for help. Emily, her granddaughter, needed to escape a broken marriage and start over somewhere safe. I didn't know much about Emily, but I owed Eleanor and agreed to help. It took me a week to secure and partially furnish a small apartment for Emily in a nearby town. On the night I arrived with a rented U-Haul, she had already packed her belongings, quit her job, and emptied her bank accounts. Her husband was about to leave for military training, giving us a brief window to act. With the help of a few neighbors, we loaded the truck and left town in under 4 hours. I made sure not to disclose where I was from for her safety. On the drive back, Emily and I started to get to know each other. Late that night, Eleanor called her. I chuckled when Emily told her grandmother, "Grandma, Michael picked me up, but you could have warned me. He's like some wild bushman who might clean up well if he tried." The next day, Eleanor contacted Emily's attorney to forward all her legal documents to my rented mailbox. Emily warned me her soon-to-be ex might cause trouble, so I took precautions. Once she was settled, Emily began managing my store and proved to be a natural leader. Her organizational skills and friendly demeanor quickly attracted customers, and she built a reliable, problem-free staff. Emily and I stayed up late, sorting through the mountain of evidence Eleanor had gathered over the past 7 years. Among the notarized statements, videotaped conversations, and lists of attorneys for a countersuit, one document caught my eye: a $2 million accident insurance policy. Emily pointed out that it had been purchased just 6 months before I left. The timing was no coincidence. Convinced this was all a setup to lure me back, we spent the night forwarding key information to the district attorney. The next morning, Emily called a few attorneys Eleanor had recommended, eventually selecting one and sending them everything along with a retainer. As soon as Cassandra's legal team filed their lawsuit, I would counterfile, striking back before they could gain the upper hand. By Friday morning, Emily called me again with more updates. "Eleanor's on her way with some guests," she said. "She left Thursday night and stayed at a hotel, so it looks like things are escalating." We decided to close the store on Saturday and spend the weekend with family. Around 7 p.m., a Ford Explorer and an Escape pulled into the driveway. Emily noticed my concern and reached for my hand. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one would know I was home. "Who's with Eleanor?" Emily asked. "That's David," I replied, "his wife Sophie holding their baby, and Natalie, my second oldest daughter." "Are you ready for this?" Emily asked softly. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. Emily, holding our youngest, opened the front door. The kids and I stepped out to greet our guests. The moment Natalie saw me, she burst into tears. I handed my son to Eleanor and pulled Natalie into a tight hug. Sophie, holding her baby, passed him to David and joined us. Seeing my daughters, now grown into beautiful women, was a moment I would never forget. "It's good to see you again, David," I said, shaking his hand. After introductions, Emily served a lavish dinner of beef shoulder, mashed potatoes, gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. Once the kids were settled, we got down to business. First of all, David said, is it all right if I call you Dad? I nodded, and he continued, Dad, the DA believes Emily's ex-husband's car may have been involved in the accident that killed your lawyer. They're doing a paint comparison with the current owner's vehicle. If it matches, he'll be charged with manslaughter. David explained that the fire that destroyed my lawyer's office on the same night was officially ruled as arson. Footage from nearby cameras had caught Emily's ex in the background. Cassandra and her lawyers likely think the sealed divorce papers mean there's no documentation of what happened. They just filed a lawsuit against you this week. Emily burst into tears, her emotions spilling over. I always thought you were being overly protective when you moved me here, she admitted. But now I see you weren't. I thought your questions to my grandmother were excessive, but now I understand. You had to know what we were up against. Eleanor chimed in. Cassandra and Vanessa received your countersuit on Thursday. They must have figured out I was in contact with you. We feared they'd try to retaliate, so we came here quickly. Emily smiled and said, Grandma, your house is ready now. It's finished. All you need to bring are your clothes. I brought most of it in the car, Eleanor said. Sophie will ship the rest, including the antiques. I've already given her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It's time for me to leave paradise for good. I'll go back with David and Sophie, I offered. I'll rent a truck to haul everything out. What are we looking for? David asked. This lawsuit is a ploy to force me out of hiding, I replied. The $2 million insurance policy makes that clear. My lawyer's death was likely a test run for something bigger. Sophie's face turned pale as the realization hit her. They were planning to kill you, Dad, she whispered. You knew it before you left town, didn't you? I suspected. I admitted. Even my lawyer didn't believe me at first. But he came around once he saw the evidence. David excused himself to make a few calls, leaving me time to reconnect with my daughters. Emily found old photos of me from when we first met, and both Sophie and Natalie admitted they wouldn't have recognized me without them. When David returned, his news was somber. Cassandra will be taken into custody after the holiday. We can hold her for 48 hours before charging her with 3 counts of theft, stealing the annuities meant for her children. We'll slow the process down, so she won't get a bond hearing immediately. He turned to me and added, Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul, and visit some old places, it'll create a buzz. Tell anyone who asks that you're here to pack Eleanor's things. That'll force Cassandra to act from jail. The DA confirmed your suspicions were right. We'll have police protection at Eleanor's house while this plays out. Emily interjected, her voice trembling. David, are you seriously using my children's father as bait? How can you guarantee he won't end up hurt? I looked at her with calm determination, and she sighed. You'd do it without hesitation, wouldn't you? Emily knew me better than anyone. He's always been like this, Eleanor said with a fond smile. That's why I called him to help you. Michael never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He's determined to end this once and for all. Tammy and Cassandra are done, I said firmly. Sasha, their actions have burned too many bridges. Even Jack's wife distanced herself from them after realizing how toxic they were. Jack leaned closer, his expression serious. Michael, something big is about to go down, isn't it? I nodded. Last night, Cassandra was arrested, and if things go as planned, we'll trigger a series of events, like dominoes falling in rapid succession. That's why I came back early. David, Sophie's husband, is working with me on this. Jack's face lit with recognition. David Moore? He's a damn good cop, honest to the bone. He even jailed 2 corrupt city council members last year. You'll have to tell me more when there aren't so many years around. Our conversation paused as Sasha pulled into the parking lot. She looked well, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes as she entered. Jack and the staff cleared the area, giving us privacy. When Sasha saw me, she froze, and I stood to greet her. Michael, she exclaimed, her emotions bubbling over as I hugged her tightly. Do Mom and Dad know you're back? Sasha asked once she calmed down. No, irraplia. And for now, it's best to keep it that way. She nodded, her tone dropping. Are you here because Cassandra was arrested last night? Yes, I said, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The police are reopening my lawyer's death case, and tying it to the arson attack on his office. They've uncovered connections we didn't even suspect. Jack interjected. So you're a decoy to draw someone out. Exactly, I said. Cassandra's arrest and my sudden return will disrupt a conspiracy that's been years in the making. After leaving the restaurant, Sasha and I headed toward my rental truck. We were deep in conversation when Vanessa pulled up beside us. Where are you staying? Sasha whispered. At Eleanor's old house, I said. I'm packing her belongings to move her to a safer location. Why did Eleanor leave town? Sasha asked. She wanted to be near Emily and the boys, I said with a smile. Emily and I have been together for over 5 years now. We've built a life, and I've never been happier. Sasha's face reflected her surprise. How did that even happen? Eleanor called me when Emily needed help leaving a toxic marriage. I moved her out of harm's way, and the rest unfolded naturally, I explained. Before Sasha could respond, Vanessa approached us. Michael, she began, her tone clipped. You need to drop part of the lawsuit against Cassandra and me. I crossed my arms. The district attorney will file charges against Cassandra within 48 hours, Vanessa. And as for your request, my attorney says that's impossible. Cassandra filed a bogus divorce petition claiming abandonment, desertion, and unpaid child support. Until the court rules on that, nothing can change. Vanessa's frustration was evident. How are we supposed to bail her out if everything is frozen? She demanded. I shrugged. Maybe your father could help. He could use his house as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters. Vanessa stormed off, visibly upset. Sasha smirked. Their father hasn't spoken to them since learning the truth about Ethan's parentage. He says they're just as manipulative as their mother. Later that evening, I arrived at Eleanor's house. After parking the U-Haul close to the garage door, I inspected the property. Something was off. The curtains, which Eleanor had left open, were now closed. I texted David, who confirmed that officers likely adjusted them. Inside, a police officer handed me a phone. David wants to speak with you, he said. Hi, David. I greeted him. Michael, Tammy and Cassandra's plans are unraveling. Tammy told Mark where you're staying, hoping he'd act. We arrested him earlier today, but he's already moving to execute their plan. As I packed Eleanor's belongings, the tension grew. Around 11 p.m., Mark made his move. Picking the front lock with a tire iron, he slipped inside and made his way to the lit kitchen. When he entered, I was calmly sipping coffee. Evening, Mark, I said. Cassandra and Vanessa send their regards, huh? Mark brandished a pistol. Tell me where Emily is, he demanded. Sorry, but I don't share details with the man who killed my lawyer and torched his office, I replied. Before you shoot me, tell me, how much did they promise you from the insurance payout? His brow furrowed. What makes you think I did it? Because you're easy to manipulate, I said. Now, was it the full $4 million, or did they lie to you like they lie to everyone else? Mark froze. They said it was $750,000, he muttered. I laughed. Mark, you've been used. Just like George, and just like me. Did you know Seth isn't even George's son? He's Vanessa's first husband's child. Cassandra and Vanessa play everyone like pawns. Mark's face went pale as the truth sank in. I'm screwed, he whispered. You don't have to be, I countered. If I were you, I'd cut a deal. Cooperate, turn in state's evidence, and expose their plan. That's how you get revenge on them before they make you their next scapegoat. Mark hesitated, then placed his gun on the table. Call the police, he said. As I reached for my phone, David and his team emerged from their hiding spots. Good decision, Mark, David said. Later, David called Sophie to update her. While waiting, Sophie prepared hot chocolate for them both. When David hung up, he was smiling. Your father surprised us all tonight, he told her. He talked Mark into confessing everything. The undercover officers recorded the whole thing. This marked the beginning of the end for Cassandra and Vanessa's schemes. Sophie froze in shock. How did Dad manage to do that? David leaned back, clearly impressed. He told Mark some truths he wasn't aware of, like the fact that Ethan isn't actually George's son. But what really sealed the deal was when your father convinced Mark that the insurance wouldn't pay out in cases of foul play. I don't even know if that's true, but it was enough to plant doubt in Mark's mind. He decided it was better to take the consequences of a lesser crime than risk life without parole. Aunt Eleanor always said Dad was quick on his feet, Sophie said, shaking her head. But I didn't expect this. What does this mean for Mom and Vanessa? Sophie asked. If Mark testifies against them, it means Cassandra and Vanessa will face charges for arson, manslaughter, and at least one count of attempted murder, David replied. Sophie immediately picked up her phone and called Emily, letting her know they had a plan. Eleanor would watch the kids for a few days, and Emily would head to the airport. Sophie promised to pick her up once she got the text with her arrival time. By the time Sophie arrived at my house with Emily, I had just finished having the front door replaced. Jack had called in a favor, and the work was done in no time. Emily jumped out of the car and ran to me, tears streaming down her face. Mark surrendered to the police last night, I said, pulling her into a hug. He gave himself up to protect me. I was never really in danger. If that's true, why didn't you call me? Emily demanded. Why did I have to hear about it from Sophie? It was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning by the time the police cleared out, I admitted. I figured I'd call you today. I pulled her closer. I promise I won't put myself in that kind of danger again. We locked up the house and drove to Jack's restaurant for breakfast, where we met Natalie, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff pushed tables together to accommodate everyone. Emily was warmly welcomed, and my parents were thrilled to hear we had 2 sons, Carson and Hunter, named after my grandfathers. They looked through all the photos Emily had saved on her phone. Just as we were finishing breakfast, David arrived, looking exhausted. Cassandra and Vanessa are in custody now, he announced. Mark has confessed to everything, including his initial plan to kill his father. He'll be charged with arson and manslaughter, but has agreed to testify. Cassandra and Vanessa are facing multiple charges: grand larceny, conspiracy, and fraud. The DA is even meeting with the divorce judge to finalize your paperwork, Michael. Emily's eyes widened. Does that mean Michael and I can finally get married? David nodded. The DA is taking your original divorce papers to the judge and requesting that they waive Cassandra's signature requirement. If all goes well, the waiting period will be dismissed and the divorce certificate will be issued. Turning to Emily, I said, I think it's time I buy you a proper engagement ring and propose to you the right way. Her eyes filled with tears, and everyone murmured their approval. Before leaving, my parents insisted we come over for dinner that night. Later that evening, David returned with my finalized divorce certificate. Emily and I were finally free to move forward. Over dinner, my parents were thrilled to hear about our journey and how Eleanor had called me to rescue Emily from her failed marriage. My father leaned back in his chair and raised his glass. This is the beginning of a new chapter for you two. We should have a wedding before you leave town. That night, David and I went to the mall. Knowing Emily's taste, I bought a 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, no one noticed we had slipped away. I knelt in front of Emily in the living room, asking her to marry me. Tears streamed down her face as she said yes, and everyone cheered. The following Sunday, surrounded by family, Emily and I exchanged vows in my parents' backyard. Even the twins' father attended, relieved to see me finally free from their schemes. Afterward, my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. This isn't a wedding gift, he said with a wry smile. Consider it an early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters. Inside was a promissory note for $100,000 with a simple message. Thank you for helping to restore justice. Watching Cassandra and Vanessa face the consequences of their actions will be my reward. Emily tucked the note away discreetly, saying nothing but flashing me a knowing smile. As we prepared to head home the next day, someone asked about our honeymoon plans. Emily laughed and said, once Eleanor settles into her new home, our honeymoon will be a family trip, a week in Florida and a week in California, enjoying Disney with the kids. Without family, we wouldn't be here today. With that, Emily and I climbed into the U-Haul, finally free of the past and ready to embrace our future. The town had a quiet, almost magical charm to it. While exploring, I stumbled upon a small, run-down gas station and garage that had been sitting unsold for years. I could see its potential and made a low offer, not expecting much. To my surprise, the offer was accepted, and the property became the cornerstone for rebuilding my life and my business. One Saturday afternoon, I sat quietly in my favorite tavern, savoring the peace. This place had become my refuge, a sanctuary where I could unwind and reflect. Shortly after settling in the town, I purchased the gas station and repair shop at a bargain price. The previous owner, eager to unload the property after it had been on the market for 2 years, practically handed it over. It was the perfect opportunity to leave my painful past behind and begin anew. The first major change I made was building a large retail store in front of the gas station. The town needed a place to shop after the only grocery store began closing early in the evening. I repositioned the fuel tanks to make the pumps visible from the store, creating plenty of parking for customers. The store thrived, especially from 7 p.m. to midnight, and remained open 24/7. Meanwhile, the garage operated from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, with occasional special projects on Saturdays. At first, the local bar was unhappy when I started selling basic liquor in the store, but it eventually turned into a profitable decision. It created jobs and added value to the community. After hiring a sharp and resourceful woman to restructure the store's merchandising, the business quickly repaid its equity loan and demand doubled. On Friday and Saturday nights, the store was packed with bar patrons buying snacks, while Sundays brought steady sales of beer at reasonable prices. That evening, I sat at the bar, sipping a double shot of Jack Daniels with ice water and lemon. Earlier, I had finished replacing the steering column in an old family heirloom truck, a project that had taken 8 months to complete. Its owner, whose family had owned the truck since the 1940s, joked that he'd rather be buried in it than ever let it go. Between 4 o'clock and 7 p.m., the bar was usually filled with farmers and locals unwinding after dinner. In my 6+ years here, I had built a solid reputation and a network of friends. The locals looked out for each other and kept me informed of anything unusual. Saturdays were my routine night for a quiet drink before heading home to clear my thoughts. That's when they walked in. I froze, wishing I hadn't seen them. The woman was Vanessa, my ex-wife Cassandra's twin sister, and the young man with her was the boy I once thought was my son. Their presence stirred up memories I had spent years trying to bury. The boy had grown, and his resemblance to his biological father was undeniable. It was proof that the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, eventually rises to the surface. Why were they looking for me now? They showed the bartender a picture, talked briefly, and then left. I felt a wave of relief that my unkempt hair, beard, and weight loss made me nearly unrecognizable. No one paid attention to the message I discreetly sent. Come home when you can. About 30 minutes later, the bartender walked over to my table. They wanted to give you a message, he said. They heard a rumor you lived here and came to confirm it. They said a woman named Cassandra is dying of cancer and wants to make peace. I lit a cigarette, ripping off the filter. The woman is Vanessa, Cassandra's twin sister, I said. The boy? Cassandra's illegitimate son, whom she passed off as mine for years. What's your take? Were they telling the truth? The bartender hesitated. From their body language, I'd say they're partly honest, but holding something back. I nodded. Deception had always been Cassandra and Vanessa's game. They wore sincerity like a mask, hiding the betrayal beneath. As the bartender walked away, my mind drifted back nearly 7 years, to the day I promised never to return. They had laughed at me then, thinking I was a fool. They didn't realize I had discovered the truth about our youngest child. He wasn't mine, but my brother-in-law's. That revelation had shattered everything and sent me on this path. A family member had provided irrefutable proof of Cassandra and Vanessa's betrayal. She called them black witches, practicing pure evil. Around that same time, I uncovered a $4 million insurance policy Cassandra had taken out on me with double indemnity for accidental death. The writing on the wall was clear. An older, wiser woman advised me to flee. By the time I left, my truck was already packed with everything I valued from my 16-year marriage. Without looking back, I drove 2 states away and started over. Ask my sister to watch our son a little longer, and you should talk to Aunt Eleanor about what we've uncovered, David said, his voice measured. Maybe she'll finally open up, but this has to stay between us for now. It looks like there's serious fraud at play. Why has your mother been slandering your father all these years? And the $250,000 cash? It disappeared the moment it reached your father's lawyer. We can't tell your sister yet. If the DA starts an investigation, the fewer people who know, the better. I stood to grab some drinks, giving David privacy as he finished his call. When I returned, he asked, "Why do you want Sophie to talk to Eleanor?" "Because Eleanor gathered all the evidence about Cassandra and George's affair," I explained. "She never married, but took care of the family like a matriarch. Raising her only daughter as a single mother changed her perspective. She suspected that Vanessa and Cassandra conspired against George and me, using us as pawns. But their ultimate goal? That's still unclear. If it's true, why would they do it?" David asked. "Eleanor's granddaughter, Emily, wants her to move in with her, but Eleanor insists on staying put until the truth comes out. Emily, understandably, leads a very quiet life. Socializing with Cassandra and Vanessa takes a toll on anyone. They've manipulated people their entire lives," I said. It wasn't until Eleanor handed me the evidence that I saw how deep it went. David hesitated, then asked, "Do you want to know about your kids before I leave?" "Not until I'm sure you are who you say you are," I replied firmly. This could still be part of their game. Look into my lawyer's sudden death. If Cassandra is planning to sue me, what makes her think she'll win?" David's expression turned grim as the weight of what I was saying sank in. He realized the kind of people he had married into. Despite our initial caution, we exchanged numbers and agreed to stay in touch. After he left, I locked the apartment and took a long, indirect route home to ensure I wasn't followed. My mind raced as I thought about the past and the looming storm ahead. When I stepped through the door, two small children grabbed my legs, giggling. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-olds, the apples of my eye. They were just like their mother, Emily. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the family we had built together. "Dinner's almost ready," Emily called out from the kitchen. As we sat down to eat, I shared everything about my day. It struck me how unimaginable this life would have seemed 7 years ago when I left paradise. Back then, I had promised my grandmother, Eleanor, that I would keep in touch, and I did, calling her every Sunday. About a year and a half ago, Eleanor reached out, asking for my help. Her granddaughter, Emily, needed to escape a failed marriage and find a safe place to start over. Emily, 10 years younger than me, had no children and was living on an army base out of state. I didn't know much about her, but I owed Eleanor and was eager to help. It took me a week to find and furnish a small 2-bedroom apartment in a nearby town. With a rented U-Haul, I quietly arrived at Emily's place around 8 p.m. She had already quit her job, emptied her bank accounts, and packed her belongings. Her husband was about to enlist, giving us just enough time to act. With the help of a few neighbors, we loaded everything she wanted into the truck and left town under cover of darkness. For safety, I refused to tell anyone where we were going. As we drove, Emily and I began to get to know each other. Late that night, Eleanor called to check in. I chuckled when Emily told her, "Grandma, Michael picked me up, but you could have warned me. He's like a wild bushman who might look half decent if he cleaned up." The next day, Eleanor contacted Emily's attorney and had all her legal documents forwarded to my rented FedEx mailbox. Emily warned me that her ex might cause trouble, so I took precautions. Once settled, she began managing my store and quickly proved herself. Her organizational skills and warm personality attracted customers and built a reliable, problem-free staff. Emily and I grew closer over time. The day her divorce was finalized, we celebrated with friends at a local bar. During a slow dance, we shared our first kiss. 6 months later, we moved in together. One evening, while the kids were bathing, I shaved off my beard and mustache, leaving only stubble. The toddlers watched in amazement as I soaked my face and theirs with the bowl and brush Emily had given me for Christmas. When Emily walked in, she laughed at the sight. "It looks like Daddy would look like you with a clean face," she teased. "Should I cut his hair too?" she joked with the kids. "Yes," they shouted eagerly. By the time she finished cutting my hair, I barely recognized myself. Later, Eleanor called with news. Sophie had discovered the annuities I had set up for my children, payments they should have received for years but never did. The following week, the district attorney's office informed me that Cassandra and Vanessa were facing multiple charges, including theft and fraud. It turned out they had stolen over $48,000 from each of my children. My former lawyer's death was now being investigated as a possible homicide, with Emily's ex-husband becoming a person of interest. If the evidence held, Cassandra and Vanessa were looking at 7 to 10 years in prison. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "You'll do it, won't you?" "Without hesitation, no matter what I think," she said, shaking her head. She knew me better than anyone else. "Michael has always been that way," Eleanor chimed in. "That's why I called him to rescue you from your ex, Emily. He never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He wants to put an end to Cassandra and Vanessa's schemes for good." Emily smiled faintly, but her worry lingered. "My only fear is him walking straight into danger again," she admitted. "If Michael were a boxer, he'd be a world champion," Eleanor said with a small laugh. "He's quick on his feet and always thinking 2 steps ahead. Cassandra and Vanessa don't even realize how much he already knows." "Ladies, relax," I said, trying to ease their tension. "I'll be in David's capable hands. And if anything happens to me, remember this, David will have to answer to Sophie." David simply nodded, understanding the risks we were all taking. Later, as the women continued their conversation, David and I discussed the situation in private. "The DA believes Emily's ex will make his move once he learns you're back in town," David said. "He'll be furious knowing you helped her escape that marriage." "And Vanessa?" I asked. "She'll find out you're here through a planted informant in the city jail, likely by early Thursday morning. If Emily's ex gets caught in the act, will he cooperate to save himself?" David nodded thoughtfully. "Based on his military background, he's the type to take responsibility when caught. He's a follower, not a leader. That's why Cassandra and Vanessa manipulate him so easily." As I drove into town, a sign greeted me. "Welcome to the City of Refuge. Population 34,848. The name was ironic. This place had turned into a lawless zone where the rules didn't seem to apply. It was like the Wild West, with justice meted out according to the whims of local authorities. Honest people bore the consequences while those in power turned a blind eye to the crimes of others. Nothing had changed in 7 years, aside from the freshly paved main street. My first stop was Bob and Betty's Burger Bar. Thankfully, it was still standing, freshly painted, but unchanged otherwise. I parked the U-Haul, stepped inside, and took a seat just before the weekday lunch crowd arrived. I wanted people to notice me. I needed them to know I was back. As I scanned the menu, I noticed some patrons sneaking glances at me and using their phones. A server brought me coffee and asked if I was ready to order. "Does the Wednesday special, meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes, still come with fried onions and brown gravy?" I asked. The waitress blinked in surprise. "That's not on the menu. It's for regulars." "How do you know about that?" "Tell Jack that Michael wants it just the way it used to be," I said. She looked confused but followed me as I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen. Jack turned, saw me, and smirked. "You dumbass," he said with a laugh. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend." Jack had never changed the name of the restaurant he inherited from his parents. We had been friends most of our lives, and he wasted no time catching me up on what had happened in my absence. "After you left, my wife cut ties with Cassandra and Vanessa," Jack said, his expression serious. "She couldn't stomach the way they talked about you and the kids." I nodded, grateful for the update. "Jack, things are about to get messy," I admitted. "Last night, there was an arrest. If things go according to plan, we'll trigger a series of events, like dominoes falling in rapid succession." Jack's brows furrowed. "David Moore is working with you, isn't he? That's why you came back." "He is," I confirmed. Jack nodded approvingly. "David's a good cop, honest as they come. Last year, he put 2 of our city council members in jail for corruption." A little while later, Sasha pulled into the parking lot. I stayed seated, waiting for her to come in. When she saw me, her eyes widened in shock. "Sasha." I greeted her warmly, standing to give her a hug. "Do Mom and Dad know you're here?" she asked. "No, and it's better to keep it that way for now," I replied. She hesitated. "Is this because Cassandra was arrested last night?" Yes, I admitted, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The police believe my lawyer's death was connected to the fire at his office. They're reopening the case. Sasha's expression mirrored Jack's earlier shock. You're the bait, aren't you? She asked quietly. I nodded. If this works, it'll bring down not just Cassandra and Vanessa, but everyone tied to their crimes. Later that afternoon, Vanessa approached me as I packed up Eleanor's house. Michael, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit, she said bluntly. I can't do that, I replied. Cassandra filed a new divorce petition accusing me of abandonment and unpaid child support. Until the court rules on her claims, nothing can change. How are we supposed to bail her out with no assets? Vanessa snapped. Maybe your father could use his house as collateral, I suggested with a shrug. After all, you're his daughters. Vanessa's face darkened as she turned and walked away. Sasha, watching nearby, smirked. Their father hasn't spoken to them since he found out about Ethan's real father. He says they're just like their mother. I couldn't help but smile at that as I climbed into the U-Haul and drove back to Eleanor's house, ready to face whatever came next. In court, Cassandra and Vanessa will face charges for arson, manslaughter, and at least one count of attempted murder, David explained. Sophie immediately picked up her phone to call Emily, filling her in on the latest developments. They decided that Eleanor would watch the kids for a few days, so Emily could fly out. Sophie planned to meet her at the airport as soon as Emily sent her arrival time. After the call, Sophie shared everything with her sister, while David left to head to the station and secure Mark's signed statement before the night ended. The next morning, I woke up at 8 a.m. and called Jack to get the front door repaired. True to his word, Jack sent someone over, and within 30 minutes, the door was replaced with new trim and locks. As the repairman was finishing, Sophie pulled up in the driveway with Emily. Emily jumped out of the car and ran to me, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I saw the weight of everything she had endured. Mark was taken into custody last night. I told her gently. He surrendered to the police to protect me. I was never in real danger. Emily stepped back, her voice trembling. If that's true, why didn't you call me? Why did I have to hear it from Sophie? It was almost 2 a.m. when the police cleared out. I admitted. I planned to call you this morning. I pulled her close and wrapped my arm around her. I promise I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again. Once the repairman left, we locked up the house and headed to my brother Jack's restaurant for breakfast. There, we met Natalie, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff rearranged 2 tables to accommodate everyone. Emily was warmly welcomed, and the breakfast, as expected, was excellent. My parents were overjoyed to learn that Emily and I had 2 sons, Carson and Hunter, named after my grandfathers. They flipped through the pictures Emily had saved on her phone, marveling at our family. My daughters, Sophie and Natalie, shared how they had reconnected with me through Eleanor. As we finished eating, David joined us, looking visibly tired. Cassandra and Vanessa are now in custody, he announced. Mark has confessed to everything, including his original plan to kill his father. He'll face charges for arson and manslaughter. When he testifies, Cassandra and Vanessa will be charged with grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. David continued. The DA is meeting with the divorce judge who handled your case, Michael, to expedite the finalization of your divorce. Emily's eyes widened. Does that mean Michael and I can finally get married? David nodded. The DA submitted the original divorce papers along with everything else. The judge is expected to waive Cassandra's signature requirement and the waiting period. You should have your certificate soon. Turning to Emily, I smiled. I think it's time I buy you a proper engagement ring and finally propose. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She had always believed this day would come, but never expected it so soon. Later that day, we busied ourselves packing until the early evening before heading to my parents' house for dinner. Over the meal, Emily shared how I had rescued her from her abusive marriage and how her grandmother, Eleanor, had played a crucial role. She spoke about her first job managing my store and the life we built together. When Peter and Sophie arrived with my finalized divorce certificate, a wave of relief washed over me. I was finally free. Emily beamed as she shared stories about our children and our life. My mother suggested we have a wedding before heading home. My father grabbed David and me, leading us to the den with beers in hand. When news broke of Vanessa's arrest, people started calling in with more information. Turns out, what we knew was just the tip of the iceberg. Cassandra and Vanessa's schemes run deeper than we imagined. Even the mayor might go down with them, my father revealed. Out of curiosity, I asked, "What about Cassandra's common-law husband? How involved is he in all this?" David shook his head. "He'll likely be disbarred but won't face charges. Nothing directly ties him to their crimes, and he'll be left to raise their kids." That evening, David and I slipped out to the mall. Knowing Emily's taste, I purchased a 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, no one had noticed we'd left. As the family gathered in the living room, my father gave Emily his chair. My mother, sensing something was up, watched intently. With all eyes on us, I knelt in front of Emily and asked her to be my wife. Tears streamed down her face as she said yes. The following Friday, we went to City Hall to obtain our marriage license. Emily discovered she could fit into Sophie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man, while Natalie became Emily's maid of honor. The DA offered to officiate the ceremony himself. Emily refused to let me marry her in jeans, so I bought a suit at Macy's. On Sunday afternoon, in my parents' backyard, surrounded by family, Emily and I exchanged vows. Even Cassandra and Vanessa's father attended, relieved to see us moving forward. We told everyone we didn't want gifts, but my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," he said with a wry smile. "It's an early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000 with a handwritten message. "Thank you for helping restore balance." I always suspected those two were behind their mother's disappearance. Watching them face justice will be rewarding for me and for my granddaughters. Before heading home the next day, Emily and I hugged my parents and daughters one last time. Climbing into the U-Haul, we felt a deep sense of closure. For the first time in years, the weight of the past was finally lifted.